Hi, it's me, Roosevelt, and it's time to talk about Khaenri'ah, and I'm about to go absolutely hog wild. Feral. Alhaitham, step back, I'm going to Morb. Recently I made a video about the Traveler quest, Bedtime Story, which focused on the siblings and some broader themes of the quest. And conveniently left out anything about Dainsleif and the 5 Sinners of Khaenri'ah, but now I can no longer contain the silliness. Although honestly, this ended up also not really being about the Sinners, and one more about Khaenri'ah as a whole. I am going to talk about Vedrfolnir a little bit, and also how Khaenri'ah's last hope is supposed to destroy the Irminsul. I mostly want to focus on the Vinster King, though, because boy did I get myself into a rabbit hole. As a disclaimer, the speculation portions may be even more speculative than usual for me. But I'm first going to do a little bit of a recap of everything that we know about Khaenri'ah. If you don't want some history on that, or you've already seen my Parenherry or Arlecchino videos, you can probably skip to the new content at whatever timestamp is on the screen right now. With that out of the way, let's begin. Around the time of the fall of Salvindagnir, a guy named Imunlakr left the once verdant mountain to find a city that was being built that had no god or archon. According to Parenherry, there were 2 dynasties, the Crimson Moon Dynasty followed by the Eclipse Dynasty. The only distinction we currently know of between the 2 is their choice of weaponry. This weaponry was needed because various calamities would leak in and need to be dealt with, due to Khaenri'ah's unique position. The Crimson Moon used dark sprites or rift wolves, while the Eclipse Dynasty used machinery. Early on, Khaenri'ah had established an orphanage to foster transcendent ones, and also the first dynasty prayed to a giant moon eyeball for salvation. The Crimson Moon Dynasty would end, though, due to discontent and learning some uncomfortable truth about the sky. Now, this may be a coincidence, but at some point, Khaenri'ah also had a switch in energy sources, so that may be related to the dynasty's switch as well. Jazari explained to us that while all ruin machines have a dark power source, the earlier ruin machines have a backup energy system based on azosite, or condensed leyline energy. Because even before the first ruin machine, this azosite system was widespread in Khaenri'ah society. Regardless if that's related to the dynastic turnover, it's important to know that there was a switch to a dark, perpetual energy source that was related to peeking beyond the skies. While this knowledge from beyond contributed to Khaenri'ah's prosperity, there were also many in the kingdom who were resistant to this change. King Irmin was the last king of Khaenri'ah, although technically he's the only named king of Khaenri'ah that we know of, but he may have ushered in this period of prosperity. But his strength would fail and he would become indisposed, and Knight Marshal Anfortis would step in as regent to lead the Regnum Concilium Ultimum. This was the last council of the kingdom and probably the court that Piero served in as a mage. And Anfortis was the leader of Schwanenritter. These were the Swan Knights that piloted the giant ruin machines in Sumeru. Anfortis is also important because he's heavily insinuated to also be an Alberic, relation to Clotar, Caribert, and Kaeya, unknown. This leads us to the end of the Eclipse Dynasty. 500 years ago, Khaenri'ah was destroyed in the Cataclysm, and this was a disaster felt gravely in every nation. Sometime prior to this, the sibling was summoned to Khaenri'ah. The exact events and their timings are uncertain. We know that there was perhaps some irrigation going on, with the heavenly principles punishing all of Khaenri'ah, and that Gold, or Rhindaughter, was responsible for the monsters. One thing to note is in the Khvarena of Good and Evil quest. Nasajuna points out that Khaenri'ah fought against the Abyss, and indeed we already knew that Schwanenritter were hailed as the heroes of Dahri. But the legacy of Khaenri'ah was smeared as sinners. So, whatever actually transpired, it definitely seems like the whole faced the consequences for the actions of a few. One of the points of Caribert was to show this aspect of cruelty of the heavenly principles. They essentially punished innocent and good people. Bedtime Story more or less confirms that with a little bit more detail. We learn about the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah, the wise Raptatir, the visionary Vedrfolnir, Gold, Rhindaughter, the Foul Sertologi, and Rehir of Solnari, Rehrir. They were peerless and were supposed to prevent the disaster of the Cataclysm. They were the ones to stop the Vinster King from continuing to rock the foundation of the world. But Dainsleif says they are the ones who betrayed Khaenri'ah and, unable to resist the temptation of abyssal power, became transcendent. Like I mentioned, there were people against the use of dark power. There's a letter addressed to Anfortis requesting to ask the king to preserve the old energy systems. And we also know that Piero warned against the unveiling of sin. He may have actually been the author of this letter. So I think it's highly unlikely Piero is any one of these, especially since the Fatui are opposed to the Abyss as well. For example, the Fatui was having a successful collaboration with Liyue to suppress the darkness within the chasm. At least before the whole child incident. Similarly, Anfortis and Schwanenritter would also have been ultimately opposed to the Sinners, given their battling against abyssal monsters. So I'm not actually going to talk about the Sinners much. I've previously made a video about Rheindotter and what her vision of perfection that Skirk mentioned might be. And I think it has everything to do with Descenders and the Primordial Man. Do give it a watch if you've ever been interested as to why the final two stages of Khaenri'ah alchemy are swapped. As for the others, I think there are already a ton of great videos picking them apart individually. I'll just briefly add my mind-blowing, paradigm-shifting theory about Rehir of Solnari here real quick. So, his title in Chinese is Moon Hunter. Therefore, he is clearly the author of that one post that wants to fight the moon. Wow, this really blew up. Wish the moon would. Now let's talk about Vedrfolnir. Vedrfolnir is Dainsleif's hot older brother, the Sinner's voice from the Crystal in the Chasm, and also probably the one who foretold Fontaine's prophecy. This solves a long-standing question. Dainsleif has a character introduction signed by a self-proclaimed prophet. This self-proclaimed prophet is also mentioned in the original Caribert quest. So I'd wager that the self-proclaimed prophet is Vedrfolnir. Now, it makes total sense that his brother would be the one antagonizing him. Typical brother activity. The revelation that Vedrfolnir read Fontaine's prophecy is not surprising, though. Like Mona literally said, only a visionary could read the fate of the world, and then we're name-dropped a specific visionary? But this has interesting implications for many reasons. First off, this prophecy gave Focalors something to work with to deceive fate. Remember, as Nahida said, true wisdom is knowing what you can change. Therefore, knowing a prophecy has power because it informs you what you can and can't change. And, as A said, even if the final destination is the same, different choices can reveal a completely different meaning for the end. Wait, shit, sorry, that was Acheron, wrong game. But Nicole has been trying to kind of give us a similar message, so it still applies. Here's the thing, though. This all may also imply, then, that by Vedrfolnir giving this prophecy, that Focalor deceiving fate may have been a part of the broader goal. I mean, the Abyss Order's entire shtick is like subverting the heavenly principles, right? Also intriguing about all of this is Nicole's involvement in the entire thing. She's a dismembered voice, just like Vedrfolnir, and is guiding Traveler perhaps similar to how Vedrfolnir may guide people with prophecy. This actually makes me wonder if the crystal is an entirely separate thing from Vedr, like Nicole's teacup. There's also a more subtle connection here. In the Travails trailer, Dane says that in the hidden corners where the god's gaze does not fall, there are those who dream of dreaming. Interestingly, Nicole uses this exact same phrase about hidden corners to suggest a way to unfold a different meaning to the prophecy's end. So, I do wonder about the connection between the Sinners and Hexencircle, aside from the obvious connection with Rheindotter being a part of both. There are a few other interesting things about Vetter that I won't get into here. For example, the connection to a world-ending sword in Legend of the Shattered Halberd. And I am definitely not going to get started on how he uses the phrase, "only the future can save the past" in Dane's Chinese introduction, which also appears in Vera's Melancholy. It's a book that I've made an old and probably now super cringe video on, but basically it's an isekai space opera. Anyway, so now I want to discuss if Vedrfolnir might have a connection to a Khaenri'ah we know. Someone who might be Khaenri'ah's last hope. Although we didn't see Kaeya in Bedtime Story, it's clear that they wanted to remind us of him. There seems to be a few parallels here, aside from some visual nods. Caribert was robbed of a peaceful life, fishing and helping out old people. Kaeya is living that life, but since the beginning, his character stories have mentioned an internal conflict. And now, a lot of questions about Kaeya's allegiance to his homeland versus his home are re-emerging. I made a video on Kaeya back during 3.8 if you want to deep dive into that, but to summarize, nearly every event and his hangout emphasize how strongly he feels about Mondstadt being home. So, wherein lies the conflict? There are certainly a lot of hints that Kaeya still has connections to Khaenri'ah. For example, his linguistic abilities, as well as him not answering Paimon's question about his involvement with the Abyss Order. He has also hinted at before a disdain for an inept god who writes fate. This is very telling because it's less than circumstantial. Like it was kinda out of left field. Now, throwing a visionary into the picture definitely adds a new aspect to all this. I've previously mentioned that it seems weird that every time we run into Kaeya, he seems to be like, "Wow, what a coincidence, it must be fate." But let's remember what Dane said about coincidences. There's no such thing. I've had a lot of ideas before about Kaeya having ways of seeing fate. And I think it's entirely possible that if he's involved with the Abyss Order, Vedrfolnir could have given him some foresight of the future. Similar to how, say, Elio gives scripts to the Stellaron Hunters in Honkai Star Rail. This way, he could always be in the right place at the right time. You know, like growing up in the city that the 4th Descender is first going to arrive in, or meeting up in a tavern that's right next to a significant leyline anomaly, and casually talking about his past with Dane listening in. You get the picture. Like, I bet that the next time we see him, he'll be like, "Wow, crazy seeing you here. Must be destiny." And herein lies the conflict. Even if Kaeya wants to cut off his Khaenri'ah ties, there's a little problem called fate. There is an inescapability of destiny, whether it be the heavenly principles or the loom of fate. As a visionary, Vetter can scry the fate of the world. And Nicole has told us constantly that changing fate is more than difficult. I mean, we've seen a few failures already, like Deshret, Remus, and Narcissenkreuz. This is all to say, though, that it may be possible that as Khaenri'ah's last hope, Kaeya has some role to play with the loom of fate. This is speculation, but I think the names of Kaeya's extended family may hint at his intended role to play. Prepare for a scuffed IRL history lesson. So basically, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Merovingian dynasty ruled over most of France and Germany. In this lineage, there are a few people named Clotaire and Caribert. There was an adjacent lineage that would, during the dynasty, take over as the actual rulers, and the end of the Merovingians and the start of the Carolingian dynasty occurred with the consolidation of power by this adjacent lineage. One of the first, but by far the greatest, of this dynasty's rulers was Emperor Charlemagne. Now, Charlemagne is a big figure in history who did a lot. But the main thing I wanted to highlight is that one of his first feats was the destruction of a sacred pillar-like figure. This pillar was a historical Irminsul. So, speculation, the Loom of Fate can weave ley lines and is seemingly entirely different from Irminsul. And if the Abyss Order's goal is creating destiny anew, that may also require the destruction of Irminsul. Which is also interesting because the Fatui may also be interested in doing something similar. despite Piero's opposition to the Abyss and the Sinners. But to do this, the Abyss Order needs a Charlemagne, who, for whatever reason, may end up being Kaeya. No idea how he would do it, though. I will say something, though, about Kaeya wanting a clean cut from his past. By wanting to defy his fate, he may ironically be living up to the family title of fortune-mocking pedigree. And I think Kaeya is also aware of hidden corners and deceiving fate. In his hangout, he improvises during the play, and he later makes a little analogy that everyone should learn to improvise in life. In the play, the original lines show the prince accepting his tragic fate, but Kaeya's improvised dialogue asserts more agency. The final scene turned out the same as it would have been without the improvisation, but his actions revealed a completely different meaning for the ending. So, like changing what you know you can change in a script, or in a prophecy. Also, a fun little fact about this hangout, which I can't shut up about ever. The lines Kaeya repeats are actually a reference to Milan Kundera's novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. This novel is a rejection of fate, specifically Nietzsche's idea of eternal return. I've previously talked a lot about Nietzsche's eternal return because it seems pretty important to Khaenri'ah lore in general. Okay, but I digress. Sorry, not sorry. Now, I want to step back to who or what Vedrfolnir and the other sinners were supposed to be fighting, the Vinster King, the one shaking the foundation of the world. I have two related ideas, and there's a rabbit hole, like I mentioned. Considering that the Crimson Moon Dynasty established weaponry to combat threats that leaked in from outside, my first option I think is a pretty straightforward one. He's the king or ruler of the Abyss. My speculation on this may be a bit different from what you might be expecting, because we do have at least one mention of the King of the Abyss. In the Chasm, you tell your tales to the bard Taliesin, who wants to write a grand epic about your journeys. He exaggerates his stories a little bit, but he also has a separate side quest in which he asks you to retrieve a ring. Taliesin tells you a fantastical tale about how this ring belonged to the Abyss King. The ring was stolen, and now the Abyss King sends his dark minions in an endless pursuit of the thief. Obviously he's spinning tales, but I think there could be a fun narrative twist here. So, a lot of Khaenri'ah lore seems to derive a lot of inspiration from Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle opera. In the beginning of the story, the dwarf Alberic steals gold from the Rhine Maidens, and he forges an all-powerful ring. The Rhine Maidens seem to be the source of inspiration for Rheindotter, whose name means Daughter of the Rhine. Rheindotter, of course, is one of the 5 sinners who was supposed to fight the Vinster King, but couldn't resist the temptation of the Abyss. This is speculation, but I think it would be interesting if Rheindotter was the thief in this story, in contrast to the Rhine Maidens having their gold stolen from them. So the gold, or the ring, would be a metaphor for abyssal corruptive power, stolen from the Vinster King. This is already creative speculation, but I want to take this further. This next part is basically fanfiction at this point, so save your tinfoil hats for later and just take cover in the fallout shelter. Although Taliesin's ring was stolen by weasel thieves, the ring originally belonged to the weasel thieves, thus the quest name, Stolen by the Rightful Owner. So I think it would be extra interesting if Rheindotter had stolen a metaphorical ring of power, and then it was stolen from her and the sinners. Consider, for example, the finale to Khvarena of Good and Evil. Zervan tells us that they found a masked Khaenri'ah swordsman in the Girdle of Sands. This is implied to be Dainsleif, but also, when he was found, he was clutching a ring. So, I wonder if Dane couldn't stop the sinners, but he could at least try to take away their power. I'm still in imagination land here, but one more thought on this. Perhaps this can also explain Dane's power. In the Travails trailer, Dane says, "We will defy this world with a power from beyond." This power from beyond is also mentioned by Skirk when she's commenting about the Traveler managing to defeat the space whale without it. That originally struck me as odd, since I assumed it referred to her master's power, her master being Sertologi, another one of the 5 sinners. So perhaps this abyssal form of power from beyond is what Dane uses. The difference between him and the sinners being he's only partially corrupted. Also, remember, the Abyss Herald in We Will Be Reunited says he smells kind of familiar. Uh-oh, stinky. Listen, I warned you this would get kind of chaotic, but this is just one fun idea. There's another path I want to take this down. In the Girdle of Sands, the door to Khaenri'ah is located in a small sub-region called Afrasiab. This name is a reference to a cave where the mythical King Afrasiab died. In the epic Persian poem Shahnameh, Afrasiab was the main antagonist and a formidable warrior bent on the destruction of his enemies. Interestingly, in some traditions he is written as deceitful and evil, even being an agent of Ahriman. In Zoroastrianism, Ahriman is the primary opposition to everything good, personifying chaos and destruction. Ahriman, in its essence, could potentially be compared to the Abyss. As such, Afrasiab would have been a king acting for and corrupted by the Abyss. So, I'm inclined to toy with the idea that this evil King Afrasiab is the Vinster king. Now, I've seen suggestions that Afrasiab is King Irmin, maybe like how Dahri is the Sumeru name for Khaenri'ah. And that's definitely a possibility, especially when you consider the deathly statuettes, which may represent King Irmin. When you gaze upon them, you can hear a whisper. See, my child, all that lies under the throne of heaven shall be destroyed by upheaval. The eternal peace of the pitch-dark void shall embrace us all. Yeah, so like, whoever this statuette actually represents, at the very least, they were definitely lost in the abyssal sauce. Also, I do think it's plausible that the king that contributed to Khaenri'ah's success became its own enemy. Just like how the ones who were supposed to protect it became sinners. Just imagine that saying, oh, the king became indisposed, was a gentle way of saying he became the Vinster king. But going back to Afrasiab, Afrasiab is also named in a musical track called Towers of Afrasiab. It's playing right now. This is most likely a reference to the words of Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan who brought the end of the Byzantine Empire. As he looked at the ruins of Constantinople, the capital, it said he recited these lines of Persian poetry. The spider is curtain-bearer in the palace of Khosrows. The owl sounds the relief in the towers of Afrasiab. This imagery evokes that of Khaenri'ah, a destroyed nation left with only cobwebs, devoid of human presence. But the musical track Towers of Afrasiab is unique in that it's really only played during one very specific limited event scene. It's during Zosimos' play in Bottleland. It's where Kaeya is playing the Dagger Bandit, searching for light for a lightless kingdom. I'm pretty sure the Dagger Bandit is telling us something important about Khaenri'ah, and I have a new thought about what that may be. And it may have to do with the Vinster king. So, to recap the story of the Dagger Bandit. The Dagger Bandit lived in a realm of darkness. He stole from the rich to give to the poor. Evil lurked while the common folk suffered in blindness. At some point, he saw a star shooting across the sky and he chased it, for he sought to capture a star to illuminate that darkness, and cure the blindness of his people. He meets a girl in white, exiled from her home, who had met a witch with a bottled flame. This bottled flame was the star, and it granted her one wish outside the bottle. Otherwise, the bottle could only grant wishes within the bottle. The Dagger Bandit would have been disappointed, but realized that the light from inside the bottle was all he needed, and they lived happily ever after. So the story is actually kind of a mess, and Paimon rips into Zosimos about how bad it is. But there's some background context about the play's inception. When we meet Zosimos, he's been working on this one script for a long time. He only had the intro done, and Idea tells us it was based on rumors flying around about a thief and a mage. He only completed the script when he saw Scooby in the gang, and specifically Kokomi was the inspiration for the heroine. So, it's multiple stories rolled into one. Let me explain just a little bit. So the girl in white was representing Adia, who had fled Fontaine during the Cataclysm. She would meet Alice, and Alice would give her a wish-granting bottle, and this bottle was Bottle Land. Bottle Land is a place where wishes and dreams could only come true within the bottle, which is the same plot point with the mage's bottle. So, based on this, and the fact that the original rumors were just about the thief and the mage, perhaps the inspiration could be restitched to just be the thief chasing a star for its light, and a mage helping him out. So, who is the Dagger Bandit? I'm inclined to think that this Dagger Bandit was an Alberic. This is largely because Kaeya had a sexy pirate grandpa, and his Sailwind shadow skin, which is based on the Dagger Bandit, is clearly supposed to be a pirate. There's also the physical resemblance. Caribert actually looks pretty similar to the bandit himself. And as Kaeya said, hairstyles are inherited, so it's a family thing. As for the meaning to the story, I'm still tempted to make the searching for light thing about Khaenri'ah trying to summon a descender. I've previously speculated that Kaeya's story about his sexy pirate grandpa is just another version of these rumors Zosimos made into a script. In Kaeya's story, Grandpa found a powerful sword dropped by Celestia, and perhaps the sword was a holy blade. Alternatively, maybe the story is about Enfortis Alberic trying to bring light to a kingdom plagued by the Abyss. But given that the heroine was haphazardly added and is separate from the bottle, I want to try thinking about this from a new angle. And I haven't forgotten my Vinster King promise. And a disclaimer, this new angle is fully crack. My brainworm has taken over my mind. Some of this won't make any sense. Why am I even here? Okay, but just play with me in this space. Indulge me. The more I look at the Dagger Bandit's play, the more I think about the Crimson Moon Dynasty. For example, the track Towers of Afrasiab. In the Persian poem it references, the towers could actually be translated more like castle or building. So I think the usage of towers may be very intentional. Well, as it turns out, in the Crimson Moon semblance, the transcendent ones from the orphanage were supposed to build glorious towers for the kingdom. Then there's also the setting of the play. The Dagger Bandit's kingdom suffered in blindness. The point of the bandit pursuing the star is to find light to cure the blindness in the kingdom. To give sight to the sightless, or perhaps more metaphorically, to shed light on a truth. In the semblance, there's a specific reference to the blindness of the High Ruler's blood, and the astrologers saw something in the inverted image of the false sky. Also, the Dagger Bandit has a crimson eye. I'm going to choose to be unwell about this fact in a moment, so hold on for that. Here's what I'm speculating. I think Zosimos' play, which is based on rumors about a thief and a mage, may allude to the fall of the Crimson Moon Dynasty. Hear me out. The Crimson Moon Dynasty was a kingdom in darkness, blindly praying to the Crimson Moon for salvation. That is, until the heretical astrologers, and perhaps a specific mage amongst them, unveiled some revelation about the false sky. That is, until, as the Crimson Moon semblance says, the dark sun's light illuminated the underground. So, perhaps this star or bottle of light was entirely metaphorical. The blindness was the inability to see truth. I mean, also consider the Abyss lackeys are all, "The truth shall set you free," and "Let the blind see." They even mention an abyssal light. And Nasajuna told us that Khaenri'ahs called the sign of Apausha the sign of truth, etc., etc. And this may also go back to my original hypothesis that the dynasty's use of weapons was due to the power source. The Eclipse dynasty used dark power for their ruin machines, and peeking beyond the skies allowed Khaenri'ah to prosper. Okay, to summarize, perhaps the Dagger Bandit brought light, the illumination of the dark sun, to a kingdom of blindness. This was abyssal power or perhaps forbidden knowledge, so people could see the truth. And maybe this was possible because of a heretical astrologer or a mage. But this same power would eventually lead to the Cataclysm. Okay, so far, yes, I'm aware a lot of this may be crazy talk, but I want to ramp up the creativity here. So again, disclaimer, this may be my brainworm's fanfiction. So, if it was the Dagger Bandit who brought the Dark Sun's light to the underground kingdom of the blind, and essentially ended the Crimson Moon Dynasty, that would mean that they're also responsible for the start of the Eclipse Dynasty. You may see where I'm going with this, but this is where I'm choosing to be very, very unwell. What am I even doing? Okay, so the Dagger Bandit's eye is red. For fans of this channel, you might be able to imagine I had a literal nervous breakdown over these 3 pixels, sobbing, screaming, crying in the fetal position in the corner of my room. Now, there are many directions we could take this, like, that's so age de vertelung of you, Dagger Bandit. Or maybe it doesn't actually mean anything at all. But if this is about Khaenri'ah, it's weird because Khaenri'ahs have distinct, piercing blue eyes. Except for maybe one. Or at least their effigy, the deathly statuette. So this is obviously only strung together by what-ifs that are fighting for their lives here, but I'll just go ahead and say it. If any of this are somehow near the mark, this points to the Dagger Bandit being Irmin, and the play telling the story of the end of the Crimson Moon Dynasty. And although the truth or light led to prosperity, it also led to Khaenri'ah's destruction. And this is where the Vinster King comes into play. And maybe that's the untold story of the Dagger Bandit, who may have once started as a hero, but as heroes who live too long usually do, became the evil dragon, metaphorically. Okay, so I know all of this sounds bananas, but this brings up a few things to me that I think would be interesting to discuss a little bit. Most notably because I did just suggest that the Dagger Bandit is an Alberic. First, I know the note in Hidden Strife said the Alberics weren't of royal blood, but I've made the argument before that perhaps we shouldn't trust that necessarily, because there are too many Prince Kaeya teases. More seriously, I think there are some hints that they may have been of royal blood, but denied their heritage. Alternatively, perhaps the royal blood is referencing the original bloodline of the Crimson Moon Dynasty. Consider this line I mentioned previously. O High Lord of the nobles of Khaenri'ah, the crimson red moon has long since fallen into the abyssal firmament, and the blindness of your blood has ended your line. Should you still pity the children of humanity, then drink deep the wine in this cup. Here, the speaker mentions the blindness of the High Lord's bloodline. Also, side note, but this sounds like it was spoken to the ruler of the Crimson Moon Dynasty at its end, with the blind bloodline ending and drinking poison. But also consider this. The name Alberic means King of the Elves. Its French cousin, Oberon, is a king of the fairies in Shakespeare. And Alberic in Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen is a thief and chief of the Nibelungs. Alberic is the one who stole gold from the Rhine Maidens. So I think it would be extra funny if in Genshin, Rheindotter had stolen some dark power from an Alberic. Listen, I did say at the beginning of the video that I was going to go hog wild. And I know that a lot of this is just a lot of loosely connected string, and that this completely ignores a lot of these big questions that I've had that keep me up at night. For example, what's the deal with Irmin being a divine halberd in Legend of the Shattered Halberd? Or like, what's the connection between Irmin and Irmin's soul? Etc., etc. But I think that's ultimately okay, because I'm just here to have fun. So just don't take me too seriously. Uh-oh, stinky. And yes, I am self-aware that basically every video I make is what new crack ideas can I come up about Kaeya and or King Irmin. But like I've said before, if I cover every potential option, then one of them has to be right eventually, right? And then everyone will think I'm super smart. Thank you all for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and share your own ideas in the comments. Also, have you checked your smoke detector battery recently? Okay, bye.